All right, for our first story today, Apple has lost a key AI exec, Roaming Pang. He moved to Meta, which is frankly, the fact that someone would move to Meta after 100, 200 million job offers is unsurprising to me. But Apple lost this guy, and Apple is really struggling. He was one of their leads in their AI efforts, and he's joining Meta's new superintelligence division. What do you make of this, Yaniv? There's the component where Apple is really struggling, and we predicted that on this show that their privacy first, their sort of second mover strategy is going to really hurt them in this cycle. There is, Mark Zuckerberg spending a lot of money trying to recruit people. And then there are questions around the kind of culture and loyalty and long-term efficacy of the team he might build with such a strategy. Pick your starting point. What would you like to cover on this one?
That's right. There's a couple of things here, right? One is, and I know I've got another story coming up that also touches on this, which is that AI is starting to do the thing that we predicted, which is disrupting the existing order, right? The Magnificent Seven or FANG or whatever you want to call them. Some of them are now starting to face some challenges. And yeah, Apple is clearly behind in AI. Losing executives to competitors is obviously not great. So that's one thing. I'm like, what is Apple's future here? I know you and I have discussed this a few times. I'm more bearish than you are. I've slowly turned bearish. I think that they've kind of lost their innovative edge. And that kind of actually brings me to the second point, because I think there is quite a strong connection. You've mentioned that Meta and Mark Zuckerberg, they are spending up big on AI talent. They've fallen behind a little bit as well, but probably not as far behind as Apple. More importantly, they are willing to make these big moves. And it's quite interesting because Apple has just as much money as Meta. Actually, they have more money than Meta. If they wanted to make these ridiculous multi-$100 million offers to build up an incredible AI team, they could afford it. They could afford it easily, but they're not. And I think that tells me a couple of things, actually, Chris. One is that maybe they just don't care that much, right? That culturally, this is not something that they are super excited by, that they're willing to make a really big bet on. They see it more as a sort of incremental technology that can make Siri better, but it's not something that they're really investing in. And the other thing is maybe touching on that theme of founder leadership, which we've talked about, and the importance of it, especially in times of challenge, right? Because if you are Tim Cook, not the founder of Apple, and you imagine having to justify spending billions and billions of dollars on an AI effort that may still not succeed, right? And paying ridiculous sums of money for AI researchers and being answerable to shareholders for that. You might say, that is not a responsible use of capital. And I'm not going to make such a big bet as that. Whereas Mark Zuckerberg, he's the founder, he's got control of Meta, and he just doesn't really give a shit, right? He already proved that with his Horizon Labs, with his virtual reality metaverse play, right, Chris, where it was like, hey, he spent billions and billions of dollars. It kind of went nowhere. Eventually, they stopped spending the money, but that's because he decided to stop spending the money. And not only did he never apologize for that, right? He didn't feel the need to apologize for that. He's going in again, just pulling out the checkbook and spending big money when he sees an existential opportunity for his company. And so these are two very different paths that Apple and Meta are making. So it's not surprising that this exec, Chris, went from Apple and to Meta.
Apple is an interesting case. They're pretty well known in the Valley as a problematic employer. They don't pay well. They don't treat their people particularly well. There's a sort of a very rigid hierarchy in terms of the way decisions are made. They're very, very secretive. You never see Apple people out and about in San Francisco or the peninsula. They're down in Cupertino, sequestered away, working crazy long hours and keeping to themselves. Tim Cook, a lot has been made about him not being a product guy. He's been able to ship some product, but he's not necessarily a good enough product guy for this moment. And he's had a few flops along the way, including the Vision Pro. Now, at the same time, they're doing a lot of research about the limits of LLMs, right? There's at least two papers we've covered on this show talking about how LLMs aren't that smart and don't really reason and so on. So maybe they have some kind of belief internally that there's a hype cycle here that is going to meet its limits pretty soon. they've now started talking. Well, they've been living with this privacy model where,
Mm,
they've been obsessed with how they're going to create this private compute cloud
yeah.
and they're not going to index your data, which I made the prediction many months ago on this show that this is going to come back and bite them in the ass. And maybe they just still they've become reinvigorated by their fundamental philosophy of second mover advantage. Is like, we don't need to chase this thing around. We just need to see where the dust settles. And there's now rumors that they're looking at outsourcing Siri entirely, just using a new foundation model or using an existing foundation model from an OpenAI or what have you. It's unclear to me how this will play out exactly. It's not too surprising to me that these AI researchers would want to move on from an Apple at this moment, given the large sums of money and given the Apple culture and the way they seem to be behaving about AI from the outside. But on the Zuckerberg side, you mentioned, the big wasted money on AR and VR, and I don't know that he necessarily sees it that way. I think the Ray-Ban glasses, which I'm wearing right now, are going to be a key form factor. He just launched the Oakley ones. He has never missed an opportunity to buy a competitor like WhatsApp and Instagram, and that has paid off for him in spades. Facebook and Meta are where they are because of Mark Zuckerberg's bets. And having been somewhat adversarial to him in the early days, I learned you never bet against Mark Zuckerberg. Openly adversary. We had a ever so slight adversary for a moment there where you knew my name, and you just do not bet against him. But I do worry that he's hiring a very mercenary team to do a very mercenary thing with very big dollars, and it's unclear to me, the ultimate cohesion he's going to achieve by trying to poach people this way with these $100 million, $200 million packages. These people have a certain agenda, and I don't know how far that gets him over the long term.
I just wanted to go back to Apple very briefly, Chris, to talk about Tim Cook, right? You said he's not that much of a product guy. He never was, right? And when Steve Jobs was alive, Tim Cook was his operations guy. And when he came into Apple after Steve Jobs' death as CEO, he continued to be an operations guy. His greatest innovation is one that, as a consumer, you can't see. It was supply chain innovation, right? Scaling up iPhones from making a few 100,000 or a million a year to hundreds of millions of these things a year, that was Tim Cook. And not only has it benefited Apple, it's now benefited the whole ecosystem, right? Where other companies are also able to benefit from this supply chain innovation. And so for a long time, the huge growth of Apple since Steve Jobs' death has gone from being a $200 billion company to being a $3 trillion company. Most of that value accrual has been on Tim Cook's watch because he's been able to scale these incredible products to unheard of levels. He was a man for that season. I think the question, Chris, now is he now the man for this season, right? Phones have been largely commoditized. Laptops have been largely commoditized. Apple is still the best at them, but the consumer surplus means it doesn't matter that much. The fact that the chips in an iPhone are faster than the chips in a Samsung, it doesn't matter as much as it used to, right? And so now we're in this AI, more software driven world where the innovation needs to come on the product side again. And I'm not sure if Tim Cook is the person for that job.
I probably agree with you, but just to take the devil's advocate point of view, and some people are probably screaming at their YouTube, you could also argue that that value accrual was as a result of the trajectory Steve Jobs set the company on, right? It was like a
Sure.
rocket ship launching into orbit, and all you had to do was strap in and hold onto your ass. And what, Tim did was simply incrementally improve stuff. I don't think that's a particularly fair point of view. I think Apple Silicon was an incredible bet. I think many of the devices and things they did were incredible. And
Agree.
I somewhat feel badly for Tim because it was like, Tim's amazing, Tim's awesome, he's a great operator. And then the moment, a year or two where it seems like they haven't quite found their footing and it's like, we need to get rid of Tim. What have you done for me lately? Get rid of Tim. It's just like,
But that is the game. What has he done for us lately, right? Like, that's the game, right? You don't get to rest on your laurels as the CEO of one of the most valuable companies in the world.
I understand. I just find people's fickleness and lack of loyalty and lack of patience to be.
Again, loyalty to one of the most highly paid people in the world, it doesn't exist, bro. Like, he needs to earn his keep every single day. And if he's no longer the right guy for the job, I think he's been an incredible CEO. The question is, is he still an incredible CEO for the circumstances in which Apple now finds itself? And I'm not sure the answer is still yes.
I understand. But the key is here, I don't think that Tim doesn't appreciate product. And I don't think that Tim doesn't want to invest in product. I think he's actually not surrounded by a great product leadership team or a product decision maker. And not everyone in the audience who listens to us for a lot, they will know what I'm going to say. A key decision maker with taste, judgment, decisiveness, who can, take these lieutenants and say, thank you all for your input, but here's the direction we're going. And here's how to elevate your thinking. Here's how 1+1 = 3.
Johnny Ive used to be at Apple, right? He left Apple.
Yes.
We thought maybe he was retiring, but now suddenly he's at OpenAI. What that actually says to me is that Apple is no longer the place where Johnny Ive feels that his taste and judgment is going to be appreciated, but OpenAI is that place. And I think that is Apple's problem.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. There is no design and product team that can be those tastemakers, those elevators, those decision makers. But I also have this instinct, this intuition that Johnny Ive's role is to some degree exaggerated in a vacuum. It's Johnny Ive plus Steve Jobs plus one or two other people working together. I think you put Johnny Ive to his own devices. I think he's a dreamer and a fanciful figure, and he's probably not connected to some of the pragmatism that's necessary that Steve Jobs perhaps gave him. I think in the early days after Steve's death, I had some inside information about what was going on in there, and essentially what happened was that each department felt like they were responsible for Apple's success. Whether it was iTunes or iPhone or Mac or what have you, they all felt like, oh, the success was really rooted in us, and we were the key foundation stone. And so there was a lot of squabbling about like which department was more important, which executive was more important, which one was half a step ahead, who should really set the strategy. And I'm sure that he settled all of that down, but I think he settled that down through operational focus and product cadence, not through tastemakers and decision makers and judgment. I know we can't name the key product executive who is leading the vision at Apple from a product point of view. And I guess we all assumed it was Tim Cook, and I don't think it is. I think he's the operations guy. We'll see how this plays out. I don't want to count Apple out. I do think they're at a disadvantage. It may not even be a long-term disadvantage. I think Apple is comfortable being second to market. They're comfortable with being third to market. They're comfortable for being decades late to market. But I don't think their current situation is reflective of the long-term game to be played. But I do think they're embarrassed by Siri. I've seen them go on an apology tour, Eddie Q and whatever, like, oh my God, here's what happened. Let me explain that. They're in there explaining architectures and architecture version 1, architecture version 2. It's like, they're on the back foot, that's for sure. Well, those are our thoughts on Apple. Do you think they're down and out and that's it? It's now a matter of gravity? Or do you think they're just biding their time and gearing up for a huge outcome in the medium to long term? Jump in the comments and let us know your thoughts.